Hello again and welcome. My name is Lizzie Lithgow and I'm the AVP of Marketing here at Carnegie. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Smart Updates for Higher Ed Websites, Driving Results Without a Redesign. Before we begin, we'd like to do a quick audio check to ensure that everyone could hear us and that the closed captioning is functioning properly. So if I could get a few folks to give me a hand raise and let me know that the audio is coming in loud and clear. Great, thank you so much. If you do have any questions or any issues, feel free to drop us a note in the chat and we can help you figure that out. Before we begin, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items before we hand things over to your presenter. Today's webinar will last about 45 minutes with an additional 10 to 15 minutes at the end reserved for Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Zoom control panel's Q&A feature to send a question directly to today's presenter. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. We've also opened up the Zoom chat room, so feel free to share ideas and interact with attendees during the presentation. Just make sure that you have your share settings marked as all attendees and presenters. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared along with today's slide deck sometime next week. We'll give you early access to the recording, so just keep an eye on your email and we'll send you a note when this content is available. And finally, please help us by filling out the quick post-webinar survey. Your comments and ratings are greatly appreciated and they influence our topic selection for future webinars. So you'll receive a follow-up email encouraging you to submit your survey feedback at the conclusion of today's session. And without further ado, I will hand it over to today's presenter, Bill McLaughlin.
Thank you, Lizzie. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for making time for this today. My goal today is to make this really good use of your time and hope to ensure that you can walk away from this with some practical ideas that you can apply in your daily job. Before we get started, I just wanted to just express my thoughts for folks in Florida that are dealing with the impact of last night's hurricane. I'm betting there are probably a few people that were planning to attend today and obviously are dealing with bigger and more important things. So just wanted to send my thoughts their way. And with that, I'll do a quick intro and we'll get into the details. We've got a lot to cover today. So my name's Bill McLaughlin. I live in the St. Louis area in University City, Missouri. I've been working in web since the 90s in a bunch of different roles. So in the early days, I was doing a lot of hands-on development and I've played a lot of different roles since those days. The common threads for me have always been around projects where something new is being built, always in service to clients. Usually those clients have been external to the organization that I worked in, so in a consulting capacity. And I've always found myself at the intersection of the design, the content, and the technology. And that's a kind of a thread or a theme that we'll talk about in the presentation today. I lead our web team at Carnegie, so I'm the executive vice president, and I was formerly co-owner and chief operating officer of M. Stoner, which was a higher ed centric agency that was founded in Chicago in 2001. And we joined Carnegie just about 3 years ago. And I'm a big fan of metaphors. So that's my fun fact for today. And we're going to use metaphors throughout the presentation, including right now. So the first metaphor is a very popular one when we talk about websites and web implementations and web design. We often find ourselves talking about home construction, home remodeling, home building as a way to think about the different tasks and activities that go into a website. But today we're going to take a slightly different angle, and I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into my home. So I live in a blended family. Myself and my partner, Corey, she has a full-time job. I have a full-time job. So we've got 2 full-time jobs. Between the 2 of us, we have 5 teenagers. So we've got a lot going on. We've got a lot of sports, hockey, football, soccer, volleyball. We've got a lot of food being consumed. A lot of craziness. We also live in an old house that needs a lot of care and has a lot of things that go wrong on the regular. And it's a pretty chaotic environment. There's a lot going on, a lot of surprises, just a lot. And so what does that have to do with managing a website in higher ed? I feel like we are outnumbered 5-2, but we're constantly in a state of feeling under-resourced, behind, overwhelmed. There's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of surprises. But it's okay. And I like this quote from my former client, Sylvie at McGill. We worked with Sylvie on a governance project several years ago, and she liked to say that she didn't need everything to be perfect. And the quote is, "I don't need to organize my classes to throw a dinner party." So I really like this quote because it speaks to, what's really important and how to prioritize, but also in a way, it's about sort of thinking about your external audiences that you're trying to serve and to make a good experience for them. So with that, let's talk a little bit about prioritization, but first, a couple more metaphors. And these metaphors are meant to help answer the question, is incremental change really the right thing for your website? So this is the three-legged stool of a website. I use this one a lot. So if you think about the seat of the stool or the flat part of the stool as the user experience that the site delivers, there are three kind of main components that come together to make that work: content, design, and technology. And if any one of those three is fundamentally flawed or broken, you're probably in a place where you need a redesign rather than incremental updates or changes. So as an example, it would be hard to make incremental updates to a site and make those valuable and impactful and effective if you had a really fundamentally flawed CMS implementation. Or if your design was out of date with your brand, or just severely outdated in general. So if you've got one of those three legs that's flawed, and certainly if you have two of those three legs that's broken, you're probably looking at a situation where it'd be a good time to do a more comprehensive redesign. But if you've got a wobbly leg or a shorter leg, or a stool that's a little bit off kilter, or you've got some wear and tear on your stool, you might have some dog chew marks or some nicks or some imperfections. There are, this is a situation where incremental improvements can be really great and really deliver a lot of value. And that's really, kind of what we're here to talk about today. So hopefully you're in the right place. Hopefully when you think about your site and the sites and the pages that you manage, you feel like you're in a place where incremental improvements can be a good solution. And, the next metaphor is around how to think about content in higher ed. So I think it's fair to say that pretty much every institution that we've worked with over the years has way too much content on their website. And also that most institutions, almost all of our clients, are feeling overwhelmed and under-resourced in their ability to deal with that. So the iceberg is a way to think about what's truly most important, and to think about the fact that the portion of the iceberg that you can see above the surface is a metaphor for those most marketing critical pages. And even on the biggest websites in higher ed with thousands and thousands of pages, I would argue that the number of pages that you would truly consider marketing critical, the ones that are most critical for your prospective students, which in our philosophy is your primary audience, are in the hundreds. And all the other content that's on the site is kind of below the surface and less critical. And that's where you get into the thousands. So I like to think about this quote from my colleague and friend, Voltaire Santos Moran. This is about governance, content management, and content governance, but it's also an antidote to content sprawl. And the quote is, "Every page needs an audience, a strategy, an individual owner, and an agreed upon review cycle." And I think, if you're in a marketing or communications job, if you're on a web team, there's probably a lot of pages that you own, and you probably have a good idea of what the audience is and what the strategy is for that page. In my experience, the harder part here is the review cycle, and it comes down to prioritization. So establishing a prioritized review cycle is often the hardest part. I like to use this pyramid. This kind of ties into the iceberg to think about the layers of content on your site, where the most critical pages are at the top. And, you know, it's a volume metaphor too, or an illustration. So you've got a small number of pages at the top of your site that are amongst your most critical. And as you work your way down through the layers, when you get to the bottom is where you deal with the most volume. So the most number of pages and the least criticality from a marketing point of view. So bringing back in that iceberg analogy, probably somewhere in this maroon area is where you would draw the surface of the water. And if you think about a way to prioritize your review, I think anything above the waterline is something that needs regular review and probably needs some attention from the central marketing communications team. That could be at the institution level, or if you're part of a professional school or a smaller group within an institution, that could be just a way to think about your section of the site. And so I think about that gold section as a very small number of pages that you're paying attention to all the time. You may not have to update them all the time. They may not require, regular updates, but knowing how healthy they are and how effective they are and if they're working correctly is something you're thinking about probably on a daily or a weekly basis. And then as you work your way down, think about scaling out the timeframes with which you're looking at these pages. So you might think about that next group in navy blue there as something that requires quarterly review. And then, there could be pages, particularly your academic program pages, that need review in a way that's tied to the academic calendar. So you may decide that your most marketing critical academic program pages need to be reviewed and, potentially updated at the beginning of each academic term. Below the line, you start to get into situations where instead of you having full ownership and control as a centralized resource, you're probably partnering with colleagues in different parts of the institution who own their own sections and their own pages. So, I like to think about those sections that are decentrally owned in kind of two buckets. One would be it's important enough content, it's critical enough content that it requires some planning. So maybe a periodic sit down that could be done maybe on an annual basis, where you sit with your colleague and you talk about, what's working well, what's not, what are your upcoming goals, how can the website or your section of the website support the goals that you have, and providing some consulting and some guidance there. And then when you get into this orange section, it's really all about having some policies and some guidelines and doing some periodic spot checks to see if things are in compliance and potentially identifying pages that can be archived. So what might this look like for you? I think it's going to depend, right? It's going to depend on how big your team is, and how big your institution is. So in this example, I think that, with these sample numbers, you might think about your most critical pages are probably in the dozens. So maybe a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen pages that you're thinking about on a daily or a weekly basis. And then you maybe have about 50 to 100 that you think about as needing some level of attention or review on a quarterly cadence. This maroon section, the academic calendar cadence, really depends on the number of academic programs. So for a larger institution, you may have a couple hundred pages in that group. But if you don't have that many programs, that number could be quite a bit smaller. And then think about the green section as something where you might have, 20 to 25 sections that you're really paying attention to. And, liaisoning with other areas of campus to discuss those pages on a, roughly on an annual basis. Also, stagger those annual reviews, right? You don't want to do them all at once. You don't want to say every January, we're going to get around and talk to everybody about their sections. Spreading those things out so that you're getting to people roughly once a year or so, whatever interval makes sense for your team. But you've got a kind of a rolling calendar is going to spread that work out and make things a lot more manageable. And then, obviously the spot checks is where you get into the thousands. So again, the numbers here are just as an illustration. For example, your numbers are going to vary based on how big your site is, how many resources you have in your team to do these types of reviews, and the number of academic program pages you have. Okay, so how do you decide what's marketing critical? There's a few different ways. So first, look at your analytics. Let your users tell you, inform, what are your most visited pages, and include those most visited pages amongst your most marketing critical. So here we're talking about sort of the very top of that pyramid. Obviously, the homepage and any pages that are one click off the homepage within the header navigation should be thought of as marketing critical. And this is another situation where I'm speaking here about the top level institutional web presence, but this could apply to any website. From there, I would look at admissions and aid. Whether that's one section or two is going to depend. But within the admissions and aid section, again, prospective students as primary audience, look at the pages there that rank highly in your analytics, that are really prominently positioned within the section and the section navigation, and provide the information that students are looking for to make their decisions and to, advance through the steps in the admission cycle. And then last but not least, the academic programs. So these are the product that you're selling. These are the pages that students really want to interact with and spend time on. They want to know, what's involved in the program, what can they expect to get out of it, who they're going to be studying with, is it the right fit for me? Do you even have the program that I'm interested in? And I think, what's true is that many times people who are searching based on program area or field of study, and their first impression on your website may be one of your program pages. So if they're out using a search engine like Google to find an academic program, they may find that, and that could be the first page that they land on. So that this is a place where they're making a first impression about your institution. So if you're not in a position to consider all of your academic programs amongst your most marketing critical, then certainly you should focus on your flagship programs, any new or emerging programs, or any fledgling programs that are coming along and getting off the ground. Okay, so tying back to the quote from Voltaire, every page needs an audience, a strategy, an individual owner, and a review cycle. I just pulled forward an example from the University of Cincinnati. So this is the Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences. In this case, the audience is prospective undergraduate students. The strategy is to generate enthusiasm for the program and to capture inquiries. The individual owner is Sam Hillman, who's a digital content specialist in their central marketing communications team. And the review cycle is once per semester. By the way, I didn't check any of this with Sam. I'm just using this as an illustrative example. So I think I'm right, but these are my words, not the University of Cincinnati's. And just also a note as we think about moving forward into the next section of the presentation. When we're talking about review here, it's not just limited to content, right? I'm not just looking at the top section of this page and going, oh, there's a typo, I need to fix that. It's about really taking a fresh look and assessing the overall quality and effectiveness of the page and what you can do to make it better. Okay, let's talk about how to optimize your pages. And we're going to talk about 3 incremental approaches. And we're going to use sort of loosely use the home metaphor. So the 3 different approaches are do it yourself, team tasks, and projects. So for do it yourself, just like any DIY project at home, you're going to need some good tools. If you don't have good tools, your ability to do good work is going to be limited. So some of the tools that I recommend, we use a lot of Chrome browser extensions. I'll show you some of the ones that I use a lot when we get into an example in a little bit. But definitely think about using Chrome. If you don't use Google Chrome as your browser, I might consider it for the extensions. It's what I'm most familiar with, so there may be extensions that are available in other browsers. But definitely think about using browser extensions for readability, accessibility, and SEO. And I would also recommend a quality assurance tool. So if your team has not licensed a quality assurance tool, in this case, I'm showing a screenshot of Dubbot, which is a tool that's available. This is something I would highly recommend. So you can see from this screenshot all the different things that Dubbot does for you. Dubbot is just one example. It's one that I like. I know the people there. I've known them for a long time. This is a product that was born out of higher education, and it provides a lot of features tailored for people in your roles at a reasonable price. There are some other options out there, but having a tool like this that you can use to run checks against your site and identify issues of quality is going to be super helpful in making these kinds of updates and improvements. We do a lot of heat mapping at Carnegie. And so heat maps are just one way that you can get some data about what your visitors are interacting with. I'll show you an example of one of those in a minute. And then obviously the better data you have, the more informed you are and the better choices you can make. So most of our clients use the Google suite. So Google Analytics and Google Search Console can give you some good insights into what people are engaging with and how people are arriving at your pages. And that can be really good data and input into your process. I'll show you some examples of that too. And then last but not least, user feedback. So oftentimes when we think about user feedback or we talk with folks about user feedback, we're talking about usability testing or more formal usability studies. Those are really important. I definitely recommend them on a periodic basis, but they can feel a little bit intimidating. And so I would just encourage you to think about, even if you can get informal feedback from students that you see, on campus, even if it's just qualitative or informal, might ask somebody to take a look at something and get some feedback. That can be really, really helpful and informative. Some of our best usability studies and tests that we've done happen when we just plop down in a common area on a campus and just grab people as they're walking by and ask them questions and try to get feedback from them on different things that we're looking for feedback on. So that definitely should be part of the equation. As much as we can try to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we're trying to engage with, it's always good to get the feedback directly from folks in the audience itself. Okay, so with those tools, let's talk about a process for reviewing a page. This is a process that I like to use myself. We're going to walk through this in a minute. But the first thing I would say is pretend like you've never been to the page before. And that's a little bit tricky. The closer we get to work, it's a little bit harder to see it with clear eyes. And if these are pages that you're looking at a lot, that's even trickier. But really try to tell yourself, I'm looking at this page for the first time. And again, think like your audience would, as hard as that may be. Then what I would say is load the page and just pause, take a breath, note your initial impressions, and then take it all in from top to bottom. And I would do that relatively quickly. This is how most of our audience will experience your pages. They're going to do a scan from top to bottom and then come back to the top and decide what to do from there. So I would encourage you to do something similar. So once you've gotten through the page from top to bottom, it's time to regroup. And I would think to yourself, and again, this part isn't what a student would do, but as communications folks, what's the purpose of this page? What is this page intended to do? What are the desired outcomes? And then think about how well that page actually delivers on its purpose. Before you go any further, I would highly encourage you to jot down some notes. And these are intended to be unstructured. Sometimes your unstructured sort of gut initial observations are going to be among the most valuable that you find. So I would jot those notes down before you go any further. And then once you feel like you've captured your thoughts and you're ready to go further, it's time to peel back and look a little deeper. So this gets into more of the structured review. And this is an example of a heat map here on the right. In this case, what the heat mapping tool is showing, this is kind of a simple example, but it's showing scroll depth, basically, how far someone is scrolling down this page in aggregate across all visits before people start to stop scrolling or leave the page. So you can see that in this case, they're getting a fair bit of the way down the page before you start to get into that yellow and green zone when people stop scrolling or they leave. Heat maps can give you other data as well. So you can get good data on links that people are clicking on, links that people are hovering on. You get hot zones. This is just one example of what you might get, but there's a lot of other outputs as well. Okay, so back to the review. here are some questions that I think should be part of a more structured review. Is there effective visual hierarchy? So by that, I mean, is the page structured in a way that it's fairly easy to tell what's most important and make your way through the page? Is the content easy to sip and dine? This is another one I'm stealing from Voltaire. But the idea here is sipping is really important. People will scan your content. They're going to want to use the way the content is displayed to quickly understand what the key points are on the page. That's the sip part. And then a subset of those people are going to want to spend more time on that page and really get into the meat of the page and potentially read through every piece of content on the page. And that's the dine part. So a good page will do both. It'll give someone the ability to scan and parse quickly, but it'll also give them really good content that they can spend some time with if they're interested in that. Is the content on track in terms of the page's purpose? Does it support the purpose of the page? Are the points of conversion clear and overt? Are there formatting or grammatical errors? And I would say when you're doing this review, do it on your laptop or your desktop, whatever you feel most comfortable with, but also do it on a mobile device and note the differences. So what's different when you're looking at it on a mobile device? And what can you glean from your tools and your data? Here, I would say take notes again. These are going to be more structured, probably more detailed, but important to jot down your observations and your impressions. That whole thing that we just talked about could be done relatively quickly, probably in 5 to 10 minutes for a page. And I think it's important to know that every page can be improved, no matter what. And every page can be simplified, and oftentimes those are the same thing. So keeping it simple is really important. As you're thinking about what you can do to make things better or make improvements, I would say first look for low-hanging fruit. Examples of low-hanging fruit are replacing images, fixing formatting issues, updating metadata, or editing copy. These are all things, with the possible exception of metadata, that pretty much anybody can do as long as they have access to editing the page within their content management system. Metadata is going to vary from institution to institution in terms of whether or not it's easy to edit or access within your content management system. And it can be a little bit intimidating for folks, but once you get the hang of it, there's really no technical skills required. And I think it's a thing that pretty much anybody can do. Subheadings are a really common pitfall. So taking a look at your subheadings and ensuring that they're used correctly. So you're going to have access to 6 levels of subheadings, H1 all the way to H6. In almost every case, those subheadings are built into the editor that you use within your content management system to manage your pages. And a common mistake is that people will use the subheadings based on their whether or not they like the way the content looks. And subheadings are meant to be used in hierarchical sequential order. So if you think of them like an outline, you should have one H1 at the top of a page. Then you'll have some H2s. You should only introduce H3s if you've already introduced an H2. You shouldn't skip a level. And so what happens a lot of times is you'll see someone like the way that the H4 looks, so they use the H4, but it's not nested underneath an H3, which is in turn not nested under an H2. That makes things harder for humans to scan and parse your page, but it's also a no-no from a search engine optimization perspective. So definitely would encourage you to make sure that those subheadings are used correctly. You might have some available components within your design system and your content management system that you can add to the page to make it flow a little bit better. It might reinforce or establish some hierarchy. It also might make the page a little bit more visually variable, which is a good thing. Sometimes if you just have a giant wall of dense text, that's really hard for people to parse and also to sip and to dine, if you will. So introducing some visual variety, providing some break on the page is a good thing from a visual point of view. And then make sure your call to action stand out. If you do nothing else, please do that. Calls to action should always be at the top of the page. Our testing over the years has proven this out. So if you've got an inline form, let's say you have an inquiry form in your page, it should be in the top. And honestly, it should be in the top right. We've tested this many, many times. Top right is the place where everyone looks for a form. If you've got your form in the top right and it's visible above the fold, it's going to convert more than if you put it anywhere else on the page. If your calls to actions are buttons or links, make sure they're at the top, somewhere toward the top of the page. If you put them at the bottom of the page, they're not going to convert as well. And then the last thing that we've learned through our design and testing is those calls to action, especially if they're buttons or links, they need to be jumping off the page. And there's a little bit of tension here with design, right? So a lot of times when we're looking at design work, we're thinking about your institution's brand and your color palette and your primary colors and your secondary colors. And we're trying to make those buttons and links really cohesive and really look really great within your palette. But what happens when you do that is those calls to actions will, sort of blend in with everything else on the page. And what we found with testing is using, I'll just use the word obnoxious. That's probably not the best word, but using an obnoxious color, like a brighter color that's not part of the palette, is going to make those calls to action jump off the page, and they will convert more than if they blend in. When you're looking at making improvements or when you're doing your assessment, I mentioned jotting down notes as you go. I highly recommend keeping lists and making those lists shared across your entire team. And those lists could be things like, hey, if I only had a component that would do X, Y, and Z, I could make this page so much better. I would call that a blocking issue. You could potentially call that an enhancement as well. But the point is that if you're running into things that you would like to change and you're not able to change them and you're going to need some help from someone else, which we'll talk about in a bit, keep that in a list. You might run into situations where you have like a larger cleanup job. So you went in, you had half an hour to spend with a page, and you realized, oh man, this section is really complicated and there's opportunity here to make this better, but I don't have the time for that right now. Keep a list of some of those larger jobs. Think of that as like a rainy day list when you've got a little bit more time and you want to circle back. So having these lists is really key. Having them shared with your team where everybody can see them is really important. And when it comes time to call other folks in for help, you'll have sort of your priorities queued up and you'll have a good agenda for some of those discussions. Okay, now we're going to put this into practice. I appreciate everyone well, not everyone, but we put out a call for submissions. We were looking for some help from people who were planning to attend today. And we got a lot of responses. So I wanted to thank everyone for responding. I picked this page that was submitted by Kara Robinson. So thanks, Kara, for submitting this page. And we're going to walk through an exercise here using some of the information that we've just talked about. Okay, so this is the tuition and scholarships page for the Master of Public Administration program at the University of North Carolina School of Government. So one thing to note, this is not really all that material to the review, but this is a subsite. The Master of Public Administration has its own site within the UNC web presence. And I just note that because you can see that from the subdomain. You can also see that the header and the links here on the header of the page are specific to the Master of Public Administration. Okay, so let's have a look and review this page. So again, the first thing that I do when I'm doing this is I just kind of take a pause and see what hits me at first. I should also mention that I'm doing this on my laptop. So in terms of viewport size, this is a laptop viewport. It's not quite stretched all the way to the edge of my screen, but I'd say this is a fairly representative look at what you would see on a laptop. Okay, now I'm going to just scan the page from top to bottom in a fairly quick fashion, see if I can get a feel for what the page is all about. Okay. All right, so I'm going to come back up and regroup. So pretty clear what the purpose of this page is. It's about communicating what financial aid options are available to students who are interested in this program. Another thing that jumps out to me is this is a master's program. So definitely a different profile in terms of the prospective student audience than it would be if it was an undergrad program. And, I would say overall, I like the page. I like that it's fairly easy to scan. There are a few things that I think are problematic. I'll get to those in a second. I did want to mention, though, I like this information at the top. So where my eye goes first is to the left, just because I'm used to reading left to right. But I actually think that the way the page is designed, that this is kind of the message that hits you first. It's in UNC blue and it's bigger. So the MPA program is committed to recruiting exceptional candidates from a wide range of backgrounds, regardless of income level. That to me seems to be the primary message on the page. And I actually think it's well done. And then supporting that, the program offers a variety of scholarships and research assistantships, and all students are automatically considered when they apply. Tuition rates are available. Scholarship funds vary depending on whether a student is enrolled in the on-campus or online format. That's actually written well. I didn't read it well, so my apologies. But I like this. I think this is really good. It right away, you're letting someone know, what this page is here for, and you're communicating that there's options, right? You want people to remain interested and to express their interest and know that they're going to have options for financial aid. Right now I'll show you one of the before I go on with some of my thoughts, I'll show you one of the browser plugins that I use. So readability is a big thing. Higher ed sites suffer from writing to too high of a grade level. So I use a browser extension called the Tray Readability tool. And if you highlight text and then you click on the tool, it's going to give you some feedback on the readability of the page. This is actually pretty good. So I would just say that this isn't a perfect tool, and these scores are controversial. They look for syllables and they look for long sentences, and they ding you if you have long sentences with words with long syllables. So high school junior is actually a pretty good score. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm using, this data to say, that kind of jives with my impression, right? These are clear, well-written sentences that are easy to understand. As I make my way down the page, I'll just say I like this infographic. Again, it's reinforcing the point of the page. I think we get into trouble when we get to here, though. I like the idea of this. This is kind of a novel way to toggle back and forth between what's available on campus and online. And you can do that here in the middle of the page. You can also do it up high at the top. And then the content that's below that is going to vary. So there's a collapsible section. I would call that an accordion. And what the contents of the accordion is toggling back and forth between on campus and online, depending on which choice you're making. My belief is that there's an opportunity here to simplify. As much as I like this design idea, this kind of novel concept, I think it might actually work better if you just use subheadings. You had a section for on campus and a section for online, and you expose the underlying content within each of those sections. So this is the online tuition and financial aid. There's really not a lot of content here, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so my belief would be that it'd be okay to expose that, or maybe you have a subheading called online, and then you use the accordion, collapsible accordion, for the components that come underneath that. So you could collapse tuition, you could collapse scholarships and student aid, and you could do the same thing for on campus. The other thing that's happening here is there's some collision happening. This is meant to be an accordion too, I believe, and it's not opening or closing, and it's hard to get this one to open or close. So there's a little bit of a bug here that I think, you could just avoid that altogether if you simplified the layout here. The other thing that jumps out to me is the calls to action are at the bottom: attend an event, talk with admissions. And because they're using this pinned header, when you're at the very top of the page, there are some calls to action that are available to you in the top right, but they disappear as you scroll down the page. and you get this persistent header that has the primary navigation links. So I would recommend repeating the calls to action or moving that call to action up higher up on the page so it's available. The last thing I would say, and this is fairly minor, I don't love on the laptop that the content is pushed below the fold. It actually looks a lot better on a mobile device. The white box is more clearly visible on a mobile device. And the only other thing I would mention is that the image itself, this is a fairly minor thing, but because it says 2019 on the tassel, you're sort of communicating to someone who's coming to this page that potentially they might walk away from that saying, oh, wow, this page hasn't been updated in 5 years. I don't think that's actually the case, but I might suggest swapping out this photo for something that's more evergreen and doesn't have a date. While I'm here, I'll just show you the other two extensions that I like to use. So there's an SEO extension that quickly will give you some feedback. In this case, it's flagging that there isn't a meta description. And then I use the Wave accessibility browser extension, which is going to give you insight into accessibility errors. I would say don't panic. It's always going to find errors there. It's always flashing things that are in red. And no page is perfect. So just use it as a way to flag things that might need some attention. Okay. I'm running a little long on time, so I'm going to bring this in for a landing. We talked about our, I keep clicking on that. That's not actually working. Here we go. We've gone through what it's like to review a page. I would just say reviewing a section is quite similar. So sometimes you're going to find yourself wanting to review sections of a site. Again, think about the purpose. What is the purpose of this section? What are the desired outcomes? Are the pages arranged to support the purpose and outcome? So the difference here is you're looking at the way that the groupings of content work together, less about the on-page experience. And I'd say the most common problem that I see when looking at sections is there's too many pages in the section. There's too many links. There's sort of this fallacy in user experience that everything should be available within 3 clicks. It's actually not true. Visitors are willing to click deeper into a site if they feel like they're on the right track. And so I would really think about organizing your links in a way that's cohesive. There's consistent labeling. It's not confusing, and it's not a hodgepodge of different pages. And again, what are those points of conversion? Are they clear and are they available? So do you have a CTA prominently displayed somewhere in the navigation set and in key places on the pages within that section? This is a kind of a cool view you can set up in Google Analytics. This is Google Analytics GA4, Google Analytics 4, and it's a path exploration. So you can get a sense of how people are navigating through a section of your site, which can be really helpful. Okay, so we've talked about DIY. That was kind of the main focus of today. I also want to mention that there are some things that you can think about as more team-based. So I would encourage everyone to set aside capacity within their teams for smaller tasks, or for tasks rather, in smaller projects, and to have people you can call on when you need help. You might need help when the need goes beyond your team skill set or the level of access that you have. So this could be adjustments to formatting, functionality, or design. Some of the things I mentioned on the UNC page, I think, are in that bucket. It could be resolution of technical issues. You might need security patches. There might be an error message. There might be a bug. You might need to reach out to your colleagues in IT to help with that. Another common area is analytics and metrics. Oftentimes you might have access to your analytics or you might not, but you might be struggling to figure out what to do with that information. So having someone that you can call who can come in periodically and help you with that, really make good sense of that data, synthesize it, give you some good insights, and give you some recommendations of things that you can change. Highly recommended. And then in terms of projects, think of these as something that you would do on occasion. So if you can, carve out time and budget for projects that you can't tackle on your own. Think about smaller projects that are extensions of your design and functionality. That could be a new template. It could be an adjustment to an existing template. It could be new components. It could be stylistic changes. Think about those as something you might do on a quarterly basis. So you might tackle one of those a quarter. If you can get in the rhythm of tackling those on a quarterly basis, you're going to be making sustained incremental improvements to your site. Your site's going to last a lot longer. And then Save up for a larger project that you might do only once a year or so. And think about that as a way to introduce new and improved functionality. So here I'm showing an example of an academic program finder. If you don't have an academic program finder, I would highly recommend it. It brings all of your programs together and gives visitors a way to search for them based on different categories. It could be on area of interest. It could be on degree type. It could be on modality. It could be just a keyword search. And it gives them an at-a-glance view of what you have to offer, which not only gives them the information about the programs, but it also gives them a sense of the depth and the breadth of the institution and the types of programs that it offers. Think about site search. We know that many people go right to the search when they come to your site. And even when they don't, even if they use your navigation sets and your information architecture is well done, it's a very important part of the experience. Investing in a licensed search tool is fairly affordable, and it's going to give you better features, more control, and more accurate results. So this is an example of a search page at Augusta University. The results have been tuned, so they're very accurate. They're able to pin suggested results at the top of the search, and the results can be filtered for different categories. This is powered by a search tool called Cluedo, which is one of the options that's available. They have a decent number of higher ed institutions use their search tool. And then lastly, I would encourage you to think about chatbot. You're starting to see more and more of these in higher education. They've been around outside of education for a long time. The research shows that young people want to use chat. They use it to get answers to questions when they're on the site. They don't like to pick up the phone. They don't even really like email anymore. So chat is a very effective way for particularly prospective undergrads, to get the answers they're looking for, and they feel like they're able to explore your site on their own terms. So I would say it's an important part of meeting people where they are. And it's also emerging as a very effective way to capture leads. In some cases, what we're seeing is evidence that people are more willing to give their information via a chatbot because they got some value out of that interaction than they are to just fill out a form. And we're seeing that institutions are getting good traction there in terms of lead capture. Okay, in conclusion, I'll go back to the start and talk about my house as a metaphor for what it's like to keep your website up and improving. We're always behind on the bills and on the laundry, but we just keep plugging away. And, that's just a constant. We prioritize the kitchen. That's our most marketing critical place, if you will. It's always clean and it's always stocked with food. And it's really the hub of everything that's happening. We look for other people to help us. Partly we do that with cleaning, and partly we do it when things break that we don't have the skills to fix. And that happens a lot. So the appliances here are 30 years old. So we have a lot of that happening on a fairly regular basis. And then we were able to save up some money and do a larger project. So we converted our 115-year-old detached garage into a bonus room. And it's been a great place for people to hang out and congregate and have fun. This is an example. That's our garage. It doesn't look like a garage anymore, but that is the Ladies Fantasy Football League. They actually don't look like they're having any fun, but they're all focused on who they're going to draft. But that's been a great addition to our house. And there's things that are completely neglected. So the basement is neglected. The yard is neglected. The yard is an absolute total mess. But it's one of those things where you get to the weekend and is that how you want to spend your weekend? Do you want to spend your whole weekend in the yard? Or do you want to do some other things? And so all in all, my point is that it's not perfect. It never will be perfect, but it works. It's working for us. It's working for our kids. It's working for people outside of the house, our friends and our family. It's a place where people want to come and hang out. And I think that serves as a way to think about, how you want to set up your site for people that you're trying to reach, and for those key external audiences that you're trying to impact. With that, I think we'll open it up for questions.
Great. We got quite a few questions in so far. Just as a reminder, if you have a question for Bill, you can drop it in the Q&A box below. First up, we have a question from Tisha. How should we be using those H tags to get the visual balance right?
Okay, great. Good question. So what I would say is use the H tags in the order in which they're intended. So start, obviously you're going to have one H1, then go to your H2s and go from there. They're really important. If you don't like the way that they look, and that could be the size, it could be the color, it could be the spacing before and after, then that is one of those design enhancements that I mentioned. If you don't have the access to the design or the skills within your team to make those tweaks to the design, then I would prioritize that as something where you get some help from somebody to make those tweaks. If you can get that dialed in, it's gonna solve a lot of headache. And like I said before, a lot of people use those because of the way they look, which is not the intent. I would use them the way they're intended and then tweak the look to match what you want or need and go from there.
Great. Next up, we have a question from Sarah. For web pages that have a pop-up chatbot icon in the bottom corner, have you tested or found that the right or the left side is more beneficial?
Okay, great question. I haven't tested that. I don't know that we've tested that, but my suspicion is that it's going to be similar to what I was talking about with the request for information form, where there's sort of usage patterns. And I think that the right side would actually probably test better. That's the more conventional place that I see it. I think that's the convention that you see outside of education as well. And so that would be my gut, but I don't have any data to back that up.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for that one. Next up, we have another chatbot question from Greg. Which chatbot tool do you recommend? There are so many to choose from.
It's a great question. I don't know that I have a recommendation. That example that I showed you is Ivy. The ones that I see a lot are Ivy. There's another one called Haldo, which is a little bit different. Some people are making their own chatbots. Like we've actually created our own chatbot. We have a client or two that are using that. There's a couple of others, but I don't know that we have like a strong recommendation. I think it comes down to, what are your needs? What are you hoping to accomplish? And then trying to find the right fit based on that and then based on your budget.
Right. Next up, we have a question from Oliver. What do U.S. institutions do more with pending ADA Title II deadlines? Colorado HB 21-1110 and California AB 1757, rather than they've already been doing for years. Do you expect, sorry, it's a long one. Do you expect higher accessibility standards to make waves internationally?
It's a good question. So I would say that I do expect. So we have a bunch of people here that are really passionate about accessibility and spend a lot of their professional development time in that space. It's a really important part of designing websites in general, but particularly in higher education. And we have been looking to the EU for years as sort of the leader in that space. So we use the worldwide, the WCAG standards for accessibility. In the early days, we used to pay really careful attention to Section 508, but we basically focus on the worldwide standards. And we know that if we can hit those standards, the US laws, the federal laws, Section 508, are going to follow suit. I don't know enough about those two examples in Colorado and California. But I would say that we do generally look to Europe, and hopefully that answers the question.
A couple more coming in. This one's from Samantha. For a graduate program page, do you have a best practice outline of how information should be ordered on the page?
I would say we probably do. I think we might have a blog about this, don't we, Lizzie?
Yeah, we do have a blog that I can link in the chat here. That's about it's titled "Why Faculty Program Pages Are Key to Graduate Student Recruitment." And I know that has kind of a checklist at the end of all the items that you need to make sure are included in that page and why it's important. So I can drop that in the chat for reference.
Yeah, and I can take a look at that too and make sure that there's content in there that addresses the question. And if not, we can maybe provide another resource or two as a follow-up.
Yeah. All right. So I'll get that added in the chat in just a second. But the next question is another chatbot from Caitlin. Do you think you lose personal interaction when prospective students use a chatbot versus connecting with a human?
I do. Yeah, I do. And I think the way that I would think about that is if you're able to get some of those initial interactions handled the way that the student wants them, via the chat, if they elect to use the chat, and you have a way to capture their information. So I mentioned Halda, and this isn't really a Halda plug. I just happened to know this because I had spent some time with them at a conference recently. They're able to capture, information when someone's willing to provide it after they've, provide some value for the site visitor. And then you have that information you can follow up. So it would get to a place where you could do both. You could let the student kind of initiate and drive the early parts of that engagement, and then you could have someone follow up with them to see if there's anything they need. And then you could start to really connect with them on a human level.
Looks like we have time for about one or two more. As this one's from Francis. As someone who works in a specific college and not central, says, but manages the college website, how can I convince a central web person like yourself to implement changes that you mentioned today?
That's a great question. First of all, my middle name is Francis, so shout out to Francis. It's an underrated name. I would say, this deck might be helpful. I think if I were advising the people in that central role, I would be suggesting that they're meeting with the colleges on that staggered annual review cycle that I was talking about at minimum. I think the other question is, where do the academic program pages live? Are they managed and owned by the colleges themselves, or have they been centralized and are they sort of under that academic program page umbrella? So that's a tough one. I think that it's like if there's not a great relationship there, or there's not if they're not prioritizing you or they don't see the need to prioritize you, you're going to have to convince them that here's the benefit of paying attention to my needs, and maybe there's a way that you could come alongside of them and come up with a way that you could work together in the future. Hopefully that helps. That's a little tricky. I'd be happy to chat more about that. That does tend to be a little bit of a case by case, and I have a link at the end here to connect if anybody wants to connect with me.
Great. All right. Last one we'll pick from Rob. Do you think there's a trend away from accordions, tabs, and carousels that, quote, hide information? Is the better strategy to have a better design to present all of the information in one glance?
Yeah, I would say that is a better strategy, but it's not always achievable because there's a lot of, especially as you get deeper into a site, there's a lot of pages that have a lot of content and they're pretty dense. And so I would say, I don't really see a trend away, but I think it's a good question, right? I think use them sparingly and use them in situations where you've got a lot of content and you want someone to have that dine and sip, right? They could use the tabs or the accordions as the dine. Okay, I know that there's 4 or 5 key topics here. I'm sorry, as the sip, there's 4 or 5 key topics here. And then when they're ready to drill deeper, they can elect to open up one of those and then do the dine.
Great. Well, as we get to the end of our session, I am going to share a couple additional resources that are all here on the chat, or I will share them in the chat. These will also be included in the email you'll receive with today's recording and the complete slide deck. So those are now in the chat for you. These additional resources I shared earlier in the presentation, again, you'll receive these tomorrow for future reference. And then We hope you found today's content valuable. Wanted to share our next event is also on accessibility. So any Slate institutions out there, our next event is happening on October 15th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And that's a Slate Tiny Trainings Making Accessibility Accessible. In this 2-hour workshop, we'll discuss best practices to ensure your website, portals, and deliver mailings are all meeting and exceeding those current WCAG standards. You can scan the QR code here to learn more about Tiny Trainings or to register for this event. And as a quick and friendly reminder, please don't forget to fill out that post-webinar survey. It takes less than 3 minutes to complete, and it's incredibly helpful to our team as we're always looking to improve our content and the delivery of our webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Carnegie event.